Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Homeless man saves millionaire from trap. Don't come in, your wife planted a bomb. In the bustling streets of New York, in the heart of the freezing winter, Caleb Jenkins walked with small steps, shoulders hunched, protected only by a threadbare old military coat with holes in the elbows and an oversized wool cap that almost covered his eyes. The wind cut through the skyscrapers like a razor blade, rattling metal signs and stirring up swirls of greasy paper. But Caleb no longer paid attention. He had learned to ignore the cold, the hunger, and above all, the indifference. As 56-year-old Caleb knew this city like the back of his hand. He knew the nooks and crannies where he could sleep without being chased away, the air vents that let in a little warmth, the sympathetic bakery employees who slipped him a croissant before closing the gate. He also knew the glances that drifted by without stopping, the tense faces that crossed the street, the awkward silences. Caleb had become a living ghost, wandering in a world that no longer wanted to see him. Yet he hadn't always lived like this. He once had a job. An electrician by trade, he worked on renovation sites for old buildings in Brooklyn and Harlem. He loved the precision of circuits and the challenge of complex installations. But one day, a fall from scaffolding broke his leg and damaged his spine. Immobilized for months, he lost his job, his income, and then his home. His wife, tired of this downward spiral, eventually left him. Since then, he survived. He no longer really lived. But despite the bitterness that inhabited him, Caleb hadn't descended into madness. On the contrary, he had hardened, sharpened. Years on the streets had sharpened his senses. He noticed what others ignored. He observed people, their movements, their habits. He read faces like one reads a map. That day, huddled behind the gates of a small deserted square, he observed from a distance an imposing Villa de Westchester, with modern lines, all in glass and steel, which clashed with the more classic buildings in the neighborhood. This house belonged to Nathaniel Blake, a billionaire businessman, founder of the technology company Blake Dynamics, specializing in artificial intelligence and computer security systems. Nathaniel was one of the richest and most powerful men on the East Coast. He rarely appeared on television, refused most interviews, and avoided social gatherings. Discreet, methodical, elegant. But Caleb knew a little more than the press. For the past few days, he had been staying near the house, drawn by the unusual comings and goings, the muffled shouts filtering through the walls, the tense faces of the staff. He had seen an elegant, dark-haired woman with icy eyes enter and exit her luxury sedan, slamming the door. He had heard arguments, raised voices, veiled threats. And then, the night before, everything had changed. As 3 a.m., the upscale Westchester neighborhood was plunged into a heavy silence, barely broken by the steady blowing of the wind against the glass facades and the metallic creaking of the streetlights. A biting cold seeped into the bones, but Caleb Jenkins, nestled against air vent behind Nathaniel Blake's house, trying to find some semblance of warmth. He had wrapped himself in a torn blanket he had salvaged from a dumpster 2 days earlier. His calloused hands held an empty coffee cup, which he sometimes filled with snow to moisten his lips. Half drowsy, he jumped up when he heard muffled voices, carried by the ventilation duct. His tired body tensed. He listened. "You're not leaving, Nathaniel." A woman's voice. Deep. Sharp as a blade. "You won't take anything away from me. You won't leave me like a common, forgotten wife. Don't you see that I've always done everything for you?" Then, after a second of icy silence, "I'll show you that no one will get out of this alive." These chilling words echoed in Caleb's mind like a clap of thunder. He knew how to recognize deep rage in a voice. Not the kind of rage you hear in ordinary arguments, but the rare, disturbing kind he'd heard before in men about to break everything, or burn everything. He froze. Then he heard another sound, quieter this time. A metallic clicking. Like an object being carefully placed, or clicked into place. Then the creak of a heel on wood, a door closing, footsteps moving away. Silence fell again, but Caleb felt that something serious had just happened. His instincts, honed by years of survival, kicked in. He slowly straightened, wincing at his aching joints, and skirted the back wall of the house. He knew the blind spots, the shadows. He wasn't a burglar, but he knew how to blend in. He arrived near the wooden terrace, went around the stairs, then saw something odd, incongruous, an overturned planter, slightly displaced from the day before. Behind it, barely visible in the shadows, was a small black box. Caleb approached, crouching down. He knew electronics. Even in his previous life, he'd worked on basic security systems, control panels, high-voltage power supplies. What he saw there was neither a garden timer nor an outdoor heating system. The case was compact, matte black, slightly curved, with 4 thin cables, 2 red, 1 blue, 1 yellow. No logo. No inscription. It seemed to have been installed recently, hastily but precisely. And above all, it was placed right against the front door frame, as if he had to react to an opening. Caleb felt his heart race. He couldn't say for sure what it was, both knew it wasn't normal. Not in this place. Not at this time. Not in the context of the threat he had just heard. He backed away slowly, his breath forming small white wisps in the icy air. He sat against the wall, his knees trembling, his thoughts a jumble. He should have left. Closed his eyes. Do what everyone else did, ignore, survive, forget. But he couldn't do it. Something, stronger than him, forced him to stay. A man was going to die. He was convinced of it. And he wasn't just anyone. Nathaniel Blake. A titan of industry. A man no one could imagine being trapped in his own home by the woman he shared his bed with. Except him. The sky was still tinged with a dark blue, streaked with a few clouds frozen in the icy silence of early morning. The city was barely waking up. Only the street lamps still cast their golden light on the wet sidewalks. In front of the Villa Ultramodern de Nathaniel Blake, a Bentley Noir came to a gentle stop. The engine stopped with a whisper. A soberly suited driver got out silently, went to open the back door, and Nathaniel stepped out, wearing an elegant charcoal gray coat. The man had the confident bearing of those who have conquered the world. His gaze was determined, though marked by the fatigue of nights too short and thoughts too heavy. He climbed the 3 marble steps leading to the front door, unaware that he was walking towards death. A few meters away, Caleb Jenkins, hidden behind a public bench and a cypress hedge, felt his heart race. His hands were shaking, his throat was dry. He could hesitate no longer. If he stayed there, silent, Nathaniel would come in, and he would be pulverized. With a clumsy leap, Caleb burst from his hiding place and darted in the middle of the road, arms raised. "Mr. Blake. Don't come in. Please. Stop. There's a bomb." "A bomb, sir. Your wife planted an explosive device." The bodyguards, surprised, reacted immediately. 2 burly men in dark suits drew pistols hidden under their jackets. They ran toward Caleb, violently slamming him against the garden gate. "Back off. Get out of here, bum. What are you doing here, huh? Do you want to get shot?" One of them grabbed him by the collar, shaking him like a dirty rag. Caleb struggled weakly, unable to exert any force. "I beg you. Don't let him in. I'm not crazy. I saw the device last night. There's a bomb behind the planter." At this moment, Nathaniel Blake, who had stopped dead at the top of the steps, turned slowly. His face, initially tense with annoyance, transformed into a mask of questioning. He made a calm gesture with his hand. "Let him go." The guards hesitated, surprised. They obeyed. Caleb fell to his knees, breathing heavily, but his eyes fixed on Nathaniel's. "Listen to me," he said, panting that I know this sounds crazy. But I swear to God I'm telling the truth. Last night, around 3 a.m., I heard your wife threatening you. She screamed that she would make you pay. And then I saw a box. Black. Stuck behind the front window box. With red wires. It wasn't a toy. I know circuits. I was an electrician for 20 years. The billionaire stared at him impassively. He had the look of a man accustomed to assessing risks in a matter of seconds. Have you been drinking? Or are you just disturbed? No, sir. I haven't had a drink. And I'm not crazy. See for yourself. You have nothing to lose. But if you go in, you won't get out alive. There was a moment of absolute silence. Even the wary guard seemed uncertain. Nathaniel frowned. Despite his rational instincts, something in Caleb's gaze troubled him. He had seen so many liars in his life. But this man, he had nothing to gain. He seemed sincere. Haunted. Then he thought of Victoria. To their argument the day before. To her icy stare. To that pent-up anger, those heavy words she had spoken. He felt a cold sweat run down his back. Call the authorities, he said to one of his men, and call in a bomb squad immediately. No one touches the house until we've checked it. Sir? Are you sure? Do it. Now. The guard hurried away to make the calls, while the other stayed near Nathaniel, who was still staring at Caleb. And you? He said finally, in a lower voice, what is your name? Caleb. Caleb Jenkins. Well, Mr. Jenkins, if you're telling the truth, you may have just saved my life. In less than 10 minutes, the district of Westchester transformed into an operational zone. Blue and red flashing lights illuminated the chic, silent facades, breaking the early morning calm. Police vehicles parked in a herringbone pattern in front of the villa, followed by a black van with the NYPD, explosives. A dozen uniformed officers immediately surrounded the house, establishing a security perimeter. Caleb, still sitting on the sidewalk, wrapped in a blanket that one of the sympathetic police officers had brought him, watched the scene with mute intensity. A few feet away, Nathaniel Blake, seemingly impassive, had his arms crossed over his chest. But his eyes betrayed extreme inner tension. The bomb disposal experts, wearing heavy suits and armored helmets, cautiously approached the front door. One of them knelt down, taking out a cold light flashlight, while his teammates secured the surrounding area. Within seconds they discovered the hidden box exactly where Caleb had described it, behind the planter, half buried in the decorative gravel. It's not a fake, grumbled the team leader. It's serious. They immediately called a remote-controlled robot, which was carefully deployed. The machine approached the device, performed a thermal scan, then a chemical scan. The technician's screen displayed in red, presence of C4 detected. The elite agents consulted briefly, then proceeded to a manual deactivation, preferring to avoid a controlled detonation in a residential area. The seconds seemed like hours. Everyone held their breath. Then, finally, one of the bomb disposal experts raised his fist in the air and shouted. Device neutralized. Secured. And collective sigh escaped from everyone's mouths. A policeman turned to Nathaniel, nodding slowly. You were lucky, sir. Very lucky. Nathaniel didn't answer. He stared at the door of his house as if it had suddenly become foreign to him. He slowly turned his head to look at Caleb, still there, exhausted, dirty, trembling, but standing with his dignity. He had been right. He had saved him. The investigation was launched within the hour. The technicians seized the casing, took prints, and analyzed the residue. That same evening, the preliminary report was clear. The bomb had been expertly crafted, with components that are difficult to trace but arranged according to a very precise pattern. A professional job. And yet, the trap could not have been set without access to the property. The internal security systems were only disabled for a very short window, between 2:58 and 3:12 in the morning, exactly at the time Caleb had heard the altercation. The digital signature used to disable alarms. The personal card of Victoria Blake. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Victoria was located in a luxury hotel suite in Boston. She was arrested. The next morning at dawn, without resistance. In his room, investigators found a second phone, with our remote detonation application, ready to use. Money. Divorce. Fear of losing everything. Victoria had discovered that Nathaniel had hired a discreet law firm to prepare for their separation. She knew that the previously neglected prenuptial agreement had been reactivated, and that she would receive almost nothing. Humiliated, furious, and refusing to lose her status, she had chosen horror, get rid of her husband before he leaves her. But she hadn't planned that a man without a name, without a roof, without a voice, becomes his obstacle. A few days later, Caleb Jenkins stood in the immense lobby of a glass and steel skyscraper, Blake Dynamics headquarters, in the heart of Manhattan. He wore a new suit, a gift from the company, but he stood straight with genuine nervousness, his hands clasped, as if he were still afraid of dirtying the luxurious carpets with his soles. When he was invited to go up to the top floor, he thought for a moment he was dreaming. The elevator opened onto a spectacular office, its walls adorned with modern works of art, flooded with natural light. Behind a huge bay window, Central Park stretched out like a living painting, green and majestic. Nathaniel Blake got up from his chair and came to meet him, his gaze warm, more human than ever. "Caleb," he said gravely, holding out his hand. The handle was frank. Respectful. "I brought you here because I wanted to tell you something face to face." He paused. "You saved my life. And I'll never forget that." He took a deep breath. "You could have looked away. You could have been afraid to speak. But you had the courage to speak out. And I believed you, because, in your eyes, I saw something I haven't seen in a long time in the people of my world, a naked truth. A raw humanity." Caleb, overwhelmed, remained silent for a few seconds. He had always been invisible, despised, ignored, and now, he was being spoken to with respect. Sincerely. This disarmed him more than the insults. Nathaniel continued. "I've decided to create a new program through the Blake Foundation. A program to help reintegrate the homeless, providing housing, employment, healthcare, and psychological support. And I want you to be its first coordinator." Caleb opened his mouth in surprise. "Me? But I'm nobody. I've had nothing for years. I lived on the streets. I'm not trained for this kind of position." Nathaniel smiled, shaking his head gently. "Exactly. You are the most qualified person to understand what these people are going through. You have survived what others wouldn't have endured for even a week. You have the experience, the insight, and above all, the compassion. I don't want a bureaucrat in a suit. I want a real man. A man who has been through hell." A silent tear slid down Caleb's cheek. He looked away slightly, embarrassed, then nodded slowly. "Okay. I accept." In the weeks that followed, Caleb Jenkins became one of the faces of the new program, Horizon, launched by the foundation. He visited homeless shelters, spoke at conferences, and told his story, without ever embellishing or dramatizing. Just the truth, raw and naked. He often said, "I'm not a hero. I was simply in the right place at the wrong time, but I chose not to look away. And that choice changed everything." The media, associations, students, all listened to him with respect. He inspired hundreds of people, and his name became a discreet but powerful symbol of resilience and excellent courage. Nathaniel Blake, for his part, never sought to reclaim the spotlight for himself. He was content to be there, in the shadows, in support, faithful to his promise. Months later, on a TV show about invisible heroes, the host asked Caleb, "If you could go back in time and change something, would you want to avoid being homeless? Wandering?" Caleb smiled softly, his hands clasped in his lap. "No. Without the streets, I would never have become the man I am. Without the streets, my eyes would not have been opened. I would not have heard that voice. I would not have saved a life. Sometimes the hardest path leads you to the greatest truth." This story reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes, badges, or titles. Sometimes they sleep outside. Sometimes they are hungry. Sometimes no one says hello to them. More they are there, and when the time comes, they stand up. Because dignity is not measured by wealth. More to the courage to act. When all seems lost.